Tonight, the French rape trial that shocked the world. 51 men are convicted over the rape and assault of Gisele Pelicot. She gave up her anonymity to show victims they're not alone, and she wanted to force a conversation about sexual assault. It's time to change the way we think about rape, she said. We'll speak to the UN Special Rapporteur on violence against women and girls and a rape campaigner here in the UK. Also tonight, the policing minister tells Sky News she wants forces to do far more to tackle shoplifting after we obtain new figures showing a huge drop in officers turning up to incidents. Keir Starmer ends the parliamentary term saying he wouldn't have done anything differently during his first months as Prime Minister. And we'll give you a taste of our Politics Hub Christmas quiz as Westminster gears down for the Christmas break. Their out-of-office emails are on, they've had their long lunches, now they're watching the clock, but before they go, Caroline Flint and Guto Harri will be with us for the next hour. It's Thursday, I'm Sophy Ridge live from Westminster, and this is the Politics Hub. Hello, good evening. For me, there's only one contender for Person of the Year, Gisele Pelicot, the woman who has recalibrated how we think about rape by refusing to feel shame. It's time we change the way we look at rape, she said outside the court today. And more than anyone I can think of, she's done that. Shame must change sides, she said. And perhaps that's a little more true today than it's ever been before. But there is something else that I want to talk about. Something that's much more difficult to confront than the inspiration and the dignity of Gisele Pelicot. 51 men. 51 men who are not all men, but who are also quite a lot of men. 51 of them, in fact. And if you read about them, their backgrounds, their jobs, their families or lack of family, well, they're all quite different. A firefighter, a nurse, an unemployed alcoholic. Some were abused as children. Some had comfortable upbringings with kids of their own. 6 had domestic violence convictions, but 45 didn't. One was 27, another was 74. You know, there's just no pattern here. There's nothing we can point to, other than the fact that there is no profile of a rapist, which is perhaps the most frightening thing of all. Well, here's our Europe correspondent, Siobhan Robbins, who's been reporting from the court today.
Arriving at court to a chorus of support, Gisele Pelicot, a woman subjected to around 200 rapes, proud to show her face. She is exceptional. Her attackers are not. Men hiding behind masks with bags packed for prison. Prudent planning in the end. Because 50 men, alongside Dominique Pelicot, Gisele's ex-husband, were given jail sentences totaling more than 400 years. A victory for the woman they tried to make the victim.
Je pense aussi à toutes les autres familles touchées par ce drame.
I'm thinking about all the families affected by this case and the unnamed victims in these stories who are often in the shadows. You should know we share the same struggle. I have faith we can take hold of a future in which everybody, men and women, can live together in harmony and respect and mutual understanding.
Dominique was given a 20-year sentence, the sick conductor in an orchestra of abuse.
He's aware of the trauma and the tsunami that this has caused them, and he regrets it. He's expressed this from the moment he was taken into custody.
Dominique invited men to their home in the pretty village of Mazan and filmed them raping a sedated Gisele, supporting their mother, 3 children devastated by the sins of their father, a man who will likely die in prison.
This trial was a very difficult ordeal. I think first of all of my 3 children, David, Caroline and Florian, and my grandchildren. It was also for them that I fought this battle.
In text to his fellow rapists, Dominique showed no remorse. In one message to one of the convicted men, Patrick A., in 2018, Dominique Pelicot wrote, "I'm looking for a kinky accomplice to abuse my wife at home who is asleep." To another, Redouan E., he said, "Make sure you wait and check that she's fast asleep." This premeditated predator was caught by chance after he was spotted filming up women's skirts by a security guard, leading police to uncover 20,000 images of abuse by one of France's worst sex offenders.
The trial may be over, but questions remain. At least 11 men filmed by Dominique Pelicot have yet to be identified. They are still free. They are the fathers, the brothers, the husbands that walk among us.
On the edge of the village where Gisele was repeatedly raped, this centre helps similar survivors of abuse. Latika found out her own husband had been drugging and raping her, dosing her drinks, just like Dominique.
Et dans la nuit, je me réveille, il est sur moi.
In the middle of the night, I woke up and he was on top of me, raping me, she said. He was close to finishing the act and I was shocked, paralysed. I didn't understand what was happening to me.
Je comprenais pas ce qui m'arrivait.
But after Gisele spoke out, she decided to do the same. She's helped women, especially me, to find their voice and speak out about what's happened to them without shame. Getting justice has taken 4 years, so for some of the guilty, there was no more prison time left to serve. Instead, they faced public punishment as they walked to freedom. No such reception for Gisele. For hers is the only name here that will be remembered. Gisele Pelicot, the woman who forced France to talk about rape. Siobhan Robbins, Sky News, Avignon.
Well, we can speak now to Reem Alsalem, who is the Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women and Girls for the United Nations. Thank you so much for being on the programme this evening to talk about this astonishing case that feels to me like it could be a real moment, you know, in how we kind of face up to and deal with rape across the world. What's your reaction to what we've seen?
Yes, it's very much a watershed moment. In a way, it's representatives of so many cases that happen every day, but it took really this case to shock our conscience, to make us realize to what extent, to how violent and intrusive such rape is, and also that many of those committing the rapes are average men that surround us women everywhere, that we work with, that come to our homes, that walk in the streets next to us. And it really brings back the discussion on consent and, you know, how the lack of consent separates rape from sexual intercourse. But also that in many cases, consent can also be meaningless and cannot be found, because if you are temporarily incapacitated, such as when you're being drugged, then no consent can be expected, really.
Mm. You speak there about the ordinariness, I guess, of the men who committed these acts. And you obviously deal with your job a lot with war zones, you know, people living on the edge, genocides. We know, of course, women and girls so often victims of war. But I think what's almost alarming about this case is the mundanity of it. It's a suburb. It's, like you say, it's people who just live very normal lives. Is that something that you've been reflecting on?
Absolutely. I mean, we know from data that violence is inflicted on women and girls by people they know. It's often their partners. It's people in their families. So domestic violence is the highest type of violence. And so it doesn't surprise me, but it also shows that we are still very far away from dealing with this pandemic of violence. I think what the Gisele Pelicot act of courage has demonstrated is that we need to, that shame has to change sides, as she says, and that really it's time that violent men and the violent perpetrators in our lives are shamed, are held responsible, and are punished, because of course the ongoing impunity and the lack of accountability is what allows this to fester. And frankly, there's one aspect that perhaps is not being discussed sufficiently, is also the impact of pornography in perpetrating violence by men in our societies. And there is an element of, filming and porn, and her former husband has invited countless men really to rape rape Gisele, and then was filming that. So I'm hoping that there is more discussion about the impact of pornography, but also the new forms of violence that and means of violence that we are seeing, such as use of drugging and intoxication against women and girls, and the fact that our legislations need to also address that and deal with that.
It's really interesting to hear you talk about pornography. I guess the other aspect of the case is the fact that many of these men connected online in a forum. It's something that you're not going to just randomly talk to a stranger about in the park. But if you're in what you feel is a secret space on the internet, then are you worried that these kind of conversations and these kind of people are linking up?
Yes, I mean, we know absolutely that they are linking up, and we know that digital technology is an accelerator of this form of violence. And as I said, that legislation is not moving fast enough to address it. What this case also raises is the reality in many parts of the world, unfortunately, that also marital rape continues not to be criminalized. So yes, a number of countries have changed their laws to explicitly criminalize marital rape, but it's not the case everywhere. So we really still have a long way to go. But I'm of course in awe of Gisele Pelicot's courage. I'm in awe of the hope she has given to every victim out there that may not have been heard or may not have felt vindicated. She has single-handedly and very humbly turned this around to focus, as I said, on the perpetrators, to focus on the ugliness of this crime and the banality of it at the same time.
Yeah, shame must change sides, as you said. Finding a better path forward is partly cultural, but as you say, there is legislation that has to play a part too. What would you call governments to do going forward?
I think the main issue is, of course, to change laws criminalizing rape in order to link really the definition of rape to the absence of consent. So I know that in France there is this discussion that is happening. I think it's also important, as I said, to criminalize marital rape where it still happens. It's important to have also this frank and urgent discussion on the role of pornography and digital technology platforms also in accelerating these kind of appalling violence on women. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much. It's been really interesting to talk to you on an important subject today, so we appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Well, joining us now is Ellie Wilson, a rape survivor, a campaigner on sexual violence against women. Ellie, thank you for coming on the programme. I'll be completely honest, I've been quite inspired by you for a while. The way that you have dealt with what happened to you, and you've spoken out in a very strong way. So we really appreciate your time today. I just wondered if first you wanted, I guess, to kind of introduce yourself and to talk a little bit about what happened to you. Of course, only what you feel comfortable with sharing with us.
Of course, thanks for having me on, Sophie. I was raped by my former partner, and he was found guilty of raping me multiple times in 2022. And I decided to waive my anonymity after he was found guilty as well, just like Gisele has done. I think for me, after he'd been found guilty, the reports had hit the press and they kept calling him a talented athlete and they kept talking about his bright future. And I was just no one. I was a nameless, lifeless victim. And I didn't want that to be my story. I didn't want to feel like I had to be shamed and I had to keep my identity secret. So I made the decision to waive my anonymity so that I could reclaim the narrative and tell my own story on my own terms. And I also wanted to expose all of the failures in the criminal justice system that I'd uncovered as well.
You spoke about the decision to, waive your anonymity, obviously, as Gisele Pelicot has done. She said that it's not a decision that she's regretted for a second, but you have experienced some trolling, haven't you? Some, which I think is pretty shocking, I'll be honest. But it must have been a very big decision for you to decide to speak out.
I mean, just like Gisele, I don't regret waiving my anonymity, but it's also not an easy thing to do. I've faced absolutely horrific trolling and harassment. I have been told that I deserve to be raped. I've been told that I liked being raped. I've had men discuss how rapeable I am, and that's the word that they used. I've had threats sent to me, and I've even had recently someone posted a pornographic video and claimed it was of me and my attacker. And actually they'd created a poll on Twitter, or X as it's now known, and 40 men had voted saying, release this video of her. It wasn't a video of me, but it was still really distressing to experience. So, when we're looking at what Gisele has done, I think it's so important to remember that she has taken a step that requires so much bravery because it doesn't come without consequences.
Thank you. It's so shocking. I'm sure everyone listening to you will be absolutely appalled by what you've been through. It's just awful. But as you say, I guess it takes women like yourself and also like Gisele to come forward for, as Gisele puts it, for shame to switch sides. Do you feel that we're a bit closer to that today?
Totally. And, this shift has been taking place for a while, I think. Obviously, we had the Me Too movement, and I think increasingly victims are having the confidence to speak out. And it's because of brave women like Gisele. I really do believe that shame and stigma die when they're brought into the light, and nothing changes until we can talk about things.
Yeah, that's it. I think that is really it, isn't it? Definitely. I think another thing that many people will be grappling with today were how, I guess, ordinary these 51 men, I should say, were. Like, there's no pattern here, there's no classic rapists, they're all just very, very different men, different individuals. So what do you think that tells us?
There's this stereotype that rapists are these men that look like monsters and they hide in the bushes and grab women. But that's just not the reality. Rapists can look any way. They can be your pillar of the community. They can be your neighbor. They can be someone that you wouldn't look twice at. We also know as well that statistically, women are most likely to be raped by someone that they know, whether that's a friend, a partner, or an acquaintance. And I think that this case exposes that. I mean, you've got about 50 men who raped Gisele, and they could be anyone. They've been described as your everyman. And I think that also poses us with the big question, doesn't it? It's unnerving that a rapist could be anyone. A rapist could be your friend. A rapist could be your partner. And I think that the crux of it is this is all about male sexual entitlement. It's not about victims. It's about the underlying attitudes towards women. And as a society, we need to come to terms with that. And, this case is taking place in France, but it resonates around the world because this is something that women experience on a daily basis. And while Gisele is extraordinary in her bravery, what happened to her isn't extraordinary. It happens every day.
And then just finally, it's a time when we are reflecting on what we can better do as a society, all of us, but also governments too. Is there anything that you think needs to change in this country, in particular, I guess, about how we deal with rape and sexual assault?
I think it's really important that we reform the criminal justice system as a starting point. I mean, if we want women to be able to come forward about sexual violence, we need to support them through the process. We also need to fund support services that help women who've experienced sexual violence. And also as a society, we really need to come to terms with the misogyny that is live within our society. And your previous guest mentioned pornography. And I think that that's something that we really need to come to terms with, as well as the communities online of men that hate women. And we really need to toughen our laws around online extremist misogyny as well.
Well, look, thank you so much for speaking to us. I'm sure what you've said is going to resonate with an awful lot of viewers, and we really value your contribution today. Thank you. Right, let's bring in our duo for this evening, the former Labour Minister Caroline Flint and Guto Harri, the former Downing Street Director of Communications. A very heavy start to the show. It feels like a very dark day in so many ways, but I guess you have this kind of ray of light that is Gisele Pelicot and the way she's conducted herself throughout.
It's an incredible story of, in a suburb, as you said, of relative normality, 50-odd men doing what everyone would say, in many respects, were decent, respectable jobs, carrying on their lives, clearly facilitated by her husband, saw an opportunity to act out fantasies about the objectification of this woman, Gisele, and carry out the most terrible crimes. And what is so chilling about this is these were 50-odd men, live within 30 kilometres of the home where it took place. It does, I feel, as a woman, make you think, given an opportunity, how many respectable, decent men in normal lives would take the opportunity to carry out these crimes? And I think that is one of the most chilling things, because it really questions our sense of who is a rapist or who could become a rapist. And I think in recent years, and I'm not trying to put you on the spot here, Guto, but I do feel in recent years, we've had this before on the programme, Sophie, we've discussed spiking of drinks, the issue of consent, when a woman maybe has had something to drink, been at a party, passed out, and a bloke who, in all other circumstances, would not be your typical rapist, takes advantage in that situation. And what is incredible is this woman, Gisele, who has come out and said, I'm going to speak up because I think people need to know not only about what's happened to me and that I will hold my head up because I am not in the wrong here, but also the circumstances in which these crimes took place. And there is something we have to do. It's not just about more legislation, although I heard, obviously what the a woman from the UN said about making rape in marriage universally a crime around the world. But there is something culturally going on here that we need to address about what men and boys think masculinity is all about. And it's not about violence against women. It is not about objectifying women. That does not make you a man, a good man in my books.
Well, here for that. And you were right at the start. It's hard to think of somebody more inspiring for just being able to face the world, to actually be able to get up in the morning, not to mention go to court and look at those men and acknowledge to the world what had happened. So she's done an enormous favour to all of us by actually exposing this, and that makes her a real heroine. I'm always one to sort of hesitate at the idea of changing the law. I think there's an issue of detection here. The laws as they are prohibits this kind of stuff. And just on behalf of men, I don't think that any self-respecting, well-adjusted man would derive any ounce of pleasure from the kind of experience that those men were seeking with that woman, not to mention how disgusting and appalling and misogynist it is. But a decent, well-adjusted man is not going to find any satisfaction in that kind of behaviour. And so, though they are from different backgrounds, I think we can say that they're all sickos and disgusting. And the husband there aren't a lot of men out there who is happy to just invite other people in there to rape the person closest to him and film it and share it. You know, there is something, yes, the banality, the normality of some of the men, but this is an exceptional situation, I have to say.
The only thing, well, I mean, what they did in terms of a vulnerable woman who'd been drugged and then raping her, and don't forget, they were also being filmed as well, is a terrible crime. But we know, though, don't we, that right now, there are women in this country who are being abused, sexually, violence going on, 2 women every week that are killed. And the level of hate that's involved in that is carrying on behind closed doors by what some people might consider good, well-adjusted men, let alone the fact that we are seeing through social media more of our boys and girls being exposed to the most horrific pornography which they can access through their smartphones every single day. So I think, you know, I'm not disagreeing with you entirely, but I do think there is something happening around the access to the sort of pornography, the influences that is actually affecting some of our boys, but certainly it's affecting, in reality, men. And I think we've just got to get a handle on that and talk about it. We have to talk about it more and try and put a stop to the exposure of people like Andrew Tate, what people see on social media, which is, I think, there was a survey, Sophie, I was just reading about earlier. Something like 1/4 of Britons don't recognise rape in a marital situation. Even today, despite that law being around for over 30 years and it's been clarified since, they don't see it as a crime.
I think there's an issue with pornography, and it was a revelation to me. I have a son who's a student in China. They don't have, part of the control of the internet means that they don't have access to online pornography, the general population. Yeah. And do you know what? They are more innocent. They are better adjusted. They're less traumatized. They're less messed up. We have a whole load. We have an epidemic of mental health issues with young people at the moment. And I think that is related, at least partly, to the access to... There's nothing about this that's about the joy of sex, not to mention love. It's disgusting. It's about hate. It's about power. It's about all kinds of things. And yet there's a diet of this. But it takes a brave person to say we should ban it. But we certainly need to discuss, you know, there's a big difference between what some people think of maybe mildly titillating and the kind of horrific stuff that is out there at the moment that is messing with the minds of all kinds of people. And leading these men, who I do still think, I take your point, Karen, but I still think there's something quite exceptional about a man who wants to, inflict that on his wife, and the kind of man who wants to go and do that with other men present and being filmed when somebody is unconscious. It's not normal men.
I think there is that, but I think also we've had examples in this country of criminal acts being taken place, not in that organised fashion, but at a party where a woman maybe has had a few drinks or what have you and been attacked in a vulnerable situation by young men sometimes who think, here's a chance.
It is.
Can I get away with it?
It does make you think about it. It does feel as well, doesn't it, that as we've sort of been discussing, the debate could end up going towards the internet's role here. You know, whether it is the pornography debate that we've been discussing, but also these forums where people are linking up in order to do things that are clearly illegal, as you said already.
And I assume that there's always been sickos in society, but they were isolated. They were weirdos. They didn't realise there were other people like them in the world, and they didn't have access to the kind of things they dreamt of doing. And you know, this is not an argument against free speech or the internet, because that would be too far, even in a situation like this. But there is something about how the internet has facilitated a world where all these sickos who would have been isolated and living very lonely but ultimately harmless lives have discovered each other and are able to act on the kind of things that in the past they'd have just thought about.
And like so many things, it creates an echo chamber of people who basically all endorse each other's views, and that's their normality. That's their normal.
Thank you both very much. It's really not an easy thing to talk about, so we really appreciate the fact that we're all kind of facing up to it and we're confronting it. Thank you both very much indeed. We'll have more from you as the programme goes on. We do have a little bit of breaking news to bring you now because it's about who's going to be Britain's new ambassador to the United States. We can talk now to John Craig because the answer to that question is Lord Mandelson. Lord Mandelson has been chosen as the UK ambassador to the United States. He, of course, ran to be the Vice-Chancellor of Oxford University. He didn't get that job, but he's got one that many people would see as one of the plum jobs in British public life. Lord Mandelson chosen as the UK ambassador to the United States. So we're now joined by our Chief Political Correspondent, John Craig. Talk to us about this. I guess it was rumoured, wasn't it? But...
It's been speculated upon, but this is Sir Keir Starmer's most controversial appointment yet. He's loved and loathed in equal measure, Peter Mandelson. He started off as the spin doctor in the days of Neil Kinnock, and then he is obviously credited with modernising the party, the Red Rose, I remember it well. Then, of course, he became MP for Hartlepool, and then he became a minister under Tony Blair. He was sacked. He was forced to resign twice over scandals. One was over financial loan. One was over a passport row. And then he made a spectacular comeback under Gordon Brown. And he's clearly wanted this job, and he clearly feels that he is the person who will have the ear of President-elect Trump. But my word, it'll be controversial because he is seen as such a New Labour crony. And, of course, if you thought the appointment of Sue Gray was controversial, well, this is more controversial.
The other thing I do want to ask you, John, is how do you think Lord Mandelson's going to get on with Donald Trump? Because it strikes me that they're two very different politicians.
Yes, indeed. I mean, but clearly the soundings have been taken. We learned via the Daily Telegraph this week that Morgan McSweeney and Jonathan Powell, who many people saw might have been a candidate for that job himself. Jonathan Powell was deputy ambassador in the United States, and then became Tony Blair's chief of staff, a highly respected figure, and unlike Mr. Mandelson, not a controversial figure at all. But he's become the national security advisor now. But we learned this week, the Telegraph reported that Morgan McSweeney, who took over from Sue Gray as chief of staff, was the campaign chief, masterminded the successful election campaign, and Jonathan Powell went over to see some of the Trump staff. And so perhaps that was discussed there. There's no doubt that Peter Mandelson is a great networker. I mean, he is the ultimate networker, isn't he?
That he is.
He's a dreadful name dropper as well, of course, as... it's a controversial appointment, but I suppose supporters of this appointment will say it's an absolute masterstroke.
There's going to be some big issues that he's got to sort out too, though, right? With the US trade deals, of course, and then international affairs, Ukraine.
Well, trade, you mentioned there, Sophie. Of course, he was president of the Board of Trade. He was a trade secretary. He was a trade commissioner in Brussels as well. I mean, he has got an impressive CV, of course. Top cabinet minister, Brussels commissioner. He's an experienced operator. And he's apparently making a bit of money now in the private sector. But this is the sort of power job that Peter will crave.
Well, let's bring it... Thank you, John. I want to bring in Caroline at this point, because Caroline, Caroline Flint, you obviously work with Peter Mandelson, right? You know him. What do you think of this appointment?
Yeah, Peter supported me for Deputy Leader of the Labour Party, actually. So, I didn't win, but there we are. One campaign he didn't succeed in. Look, what a great Christmas present. I mean, as John says, he is very networked, not just in this country, but internationally. He has done some amazing jobs, there's no doubt, on his CV. And I think part of it is how Peter adapts to this role, which I have no doubt he will do, but also who he will have around him to support him in that job as well, particularly dealing with the incoming administration. But Peter's very adaptable, I would say, in different situations. So I think it'd be, I haven't got any worries about him doing this job and doing it well. I think in some respects, we were just chatting about this while you were talking. It's probably not a bad thing to have him doing a job like that, rather than maybe saying things from the sidelines about how the UK government is doing from time to day. As Peter does that, Tony Blair does that. Maybe that's, you know, one less person who can be around to do that sort of role.
So how do you think he'll get on with Donald Trump?
Interesting, because, you know, they are different characters, but in many ways it's an inspired choice. He's hard as nails. Mm-hmm. He is brutal, he's shrewd, he can do charm, he does a lot of menace. I've been at the receiving end as a journalist of him. He's tough,
I've had some
he's well connected.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah.
And we are looking at a brutal, transactional president who is not going to go sentimental about the special relationship. He's going to try and nail the toughest deal possible on trade with the UK. And he's up against a formidable opponent here. And I assume that what John was getting at there, that soundings have been taken and there won't be any issue, for instance, with Peter Mandelson being gay and Donald Trump not being the most, you know, progressive man on the planet, to put it lightly. But I think beyond that, he will recognise, and he'd be foolish not to, that he's got a very tough guy.
Very interesting indeed. We can cross now to our US correspondent, Mark Stone, who's there for us. Mark, this is a really key job, isn't it? What do you make of the appointment?
Yeah, it is. Just to pick up on Guto's last point there, remember it was Donald Trump that kicked Kim Darroch, the British ambassador to the United States a few years ago, kicked him out over some leaked memos about Donald Trump and the sort of person that he was. So the US president does have a role in the sense that, in terms of whether or not a British ambassador can actually stay here or not. Kim Darroch was unceremoniously kicked out of the United States and replaced by Dame Karen Pierce, who has been here since 2020. So she has straddled both the Trump presidency and the 4 years of the Biden presidency. And I have to say, of all the names that have done the rounds over the course of the past few months, Peter Mandelson has always been the one that has been at the top of the list. So it's not a massive surprise here that his name, that he has come out of the hat as the chosen one. The other option, I think, that was certainly one expectation was that Karen Pierce would have her tenure here extended. And the reason for that is because she is, you know, some call her the Trump whisperer. She knows Donald Trump very well. She has handled the Trump relationship in the back end of his first presidency, the special relationship, very well indeed. And through the course of, as it became more likely that Trump would win the election in 2020, the British, I think, would like to see themselves as very close to the incoming Trump administration. And that is largely down, so they would say, to Karen Pierce and her relationship and her team's relationship with Team Trump. So one option was to extend her. Clearly, Keir Starmer has decided no, that it's time for someone different, and that Peter Mandelson is the guy to do that job. And it'll be an interesting one because, of course, as you say, trade is going to be a massive thing. Donald Trump has promised massive tariffs on foreign trade coming into the United States. How will Peter Mandelson deal with that? And just the broader issues with dealing with an unconventional president, and he is just that. And I think the sort of character that Peter Mandelson is perhaps why they have chosen him. He's a player. He knows how to work a room on Massachusetts Avenue at the embassy. He also is a consummate diplomat, I think, and I think that's why they will think that he is a guy for the job. And one last point I would make, which I think is quite interesting, it was the outgoing president, Joe Biden, failed to become president many times over his long years. He tried to become president. He didn't make it. One of the reasons he didn't make it is because he was accused of plagiarizing. And he was accused of plagiarizing a speech that Neil Kinnock made many years ago. And that speech, it is said, was written by one Peter Mandelson. So Peter Mandelson's speech writing threads through the history of the American presidency.
I love it. Mark, thank you very much indeed. Mark Stone there. Guto, you just said that you know Karen Pierce. Is it going to be seen as a bit of a snub to her then? Yeah, well, I was based in New York for a while, and she was our woman at the UN, if you like. And she's an absolutely
brilliant operator, and everybody's worked with her adores her, and I think she has done a fantastic job, which cannot have been easy of dealing with Trump before. But what is happening here now, I think, is you need somebody who can ring people at the European Union and say, do you know where this is heading on trade? Who can ring Keir Starmer, and to be honest, in a conversation between Keir Starmer and Peter Mandelson, one of them is going to be the most powerful and dominant voice, and the other one's going to be the Prime Minister.
Oh, dear.
Boom, boom.
Is this, Caroline, this is New Labour back in charge. Are you going to be getting called up soon? For, like,
I don't know about that. I don't know about that. I won't hold my breath on that one. But I think it's...
Foreign Secretary, we need a new Foreign Secretary. We can't have David Lammy going to Washington after what he said.
Right, let's not get distracted.
OK. No, I think it is interesting because, obviously, you know, a lot of people, like Peter and others, have given advice. There are, obviously, people brought back into the fold. Jonathan Powell, you mentioned earlier, and others. And I think it's interesting in that, you know, there is something about, you know, understanding not just the glitz of 97, but some of the underlying issues there. I think where Starmer has to sort of, you know, really demonstrate about learning the lessons from that is about the approach. I mean, it was a combination, I think, of modernising the way we do politics, but it was also about that, if in some ways, a compact between the state and the British public, the rights and responsibilities agenda. And I think I'm looking to see that play out a bit more, particularly on the responsibilities side, to match what they want to do in government to make a difference in the years ahead.
Thanks both very much indeed, Caroline and Guto. Now, data obtained exclusively by Sky News shows there's been a dramatic drop in the number of shoplifting incidents attended by police forces. The lack of response has led some shop owners feeling the need to arm themselves for protection, and the policing minister says the police should be doing more. Sky's political correspondent Rob Powell reports.
Christmas Day last year at a South London corner shop. Stuck behind the counter, the cashier tries to fight off 3 thieves. A woman pulls out scratch cards as a man holding a bottle starts grabbing spirits. At a different London store, Dennis says he's targeted by thieves daily.
I used to have a baseball bat and a pepper spray, but the police said there's a weapon. I can't keep anything behind the counter.
And when you kind of call the police to report it, what tends to happen after?
They don't take seriously under a certain amount. They think that's the serious case, and they don't come.
Data obtained by Sky News backs up these concerns. In 2023, fewer than 1 in 4 shoplifting incidents were attended to immediately by police, based on responses from more than half of England's 39 police forces. In 2016, data from 16 forces shows an attendance rate of 52%, while in 2013, figures from 11 forces show a rate of 72%, a clear downward trend.
Comparing crime data is hard because forces record it differently or don't have it in an accessible format. Some insist falling attendance rates are down to modern, more remote investigation techniques, while other forces say that officers will still attend a crime scene, maybe days after a report's been made, but only if there are credible lines of inquiry.
This has become much more organised.
We showed our findings to the policing minister, who blamed declining officer numbers, but also said forces should do more.
Of course it concerns me, because every shop theft is a criminal offence. And I know that the police in October 23, they set up a plan for how to deal with shop theft, to say that they would attend if there was violence, if there was someone detained, or if there was a need to secure evidence. But obviously I want them to do far more than that.
Norfolk Police has the highest prosecution rate for shoplifting in the country, something the force puts down to a back-to-basics approach.
Bobby's on the beat, that face of people around, again, not only to deter, but also make people feel safer.
Are you able to focus more on this because you maybe don't have demand in other parts of policing?
I think it's more an efficiency thing, focusing our resources and making sure, as I say, the work is done beforehand so that we can deal with it as efficiently and effectively as possible.
That also involves working with a CCTV unit, a vision of neighbourhood policing the government hopes to emulate with what control it does have. Rob Powell, Sky News.
Coming up next on the Politics Hub. Prime Minister says he wouldn't change a thing when talking to senior MPs on the lessons that he's learned after 5 months in Downing Street. We'll hear what he said next. Hello, welcome back. You're watching the Politics Hub. Well, if there's something that Prime Ministers dread even more than their weekly Prime Minister's Questions grilling, it's that regular session with the Liaison Committee. Now, that's a group made up of all the chairs of all the other select committees. So the idea is a kind of best of the best, in theory. Well, today it was Keir Starmer's turn, and the big picture takeaway perhaps was that he wouldn't change anything that he's done so far. Here's the closing exchange with the committee's chair, Meg Hillier.
Finally, Prime Minister, you've been in the hot seat for 5 months now. You had the campaign, the general election, the euphoria of walking down Downing Street on that first day. But reflecting on your experience in the last 5 months, what would you have done differently, knowing what you know now?
It is far better to be in a position of power to change lives for the better than it ever is in opposition.
Anything you would do differently if you would give your former self, your 5 months ago self, some advice? What would that be?
Well, look, I mean, I knew it'd be tough. I knew the inheritance was going to be pretty awful. It's worse than I thought.
Is there anything that you would do differently if you were starting out now, knowing what you know?
No, we had to do tough stuff. We're getting on with it.
Right, let's chat to Caroline Guto, shall we? Guto, you're a former comms chief. That's a hard question to answer, though, right? Because if he says, oh, I wouldn't have done that, then that's going to be the headline in all the papers, right?
It is hard. It's a tough gig, actually. The liaison committee is about as tough as it gets because they are better informed, they're more, and you're at their mercy. It is. It's. We used to say, no, I won't go there. But a question where...
What you can say? You can't say that.
That question...
Unless it's something you're not allowed to say on air.
When did you stop beating your wife kind of question? There is no right answer to that. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
There is no right answer to that. But what people are looking for is a little humanity. And there we see both the strengths of Keir Starmer, because pretty unflappable in that kind of situation. He takes the brief. He knows this is a world where he's comfortable. He's done years as a lawyer. He can cruise through that. But does he inspire? Does he leave us feeling good about him being Prime Minister? No, because he lacks the sort of humanity and the kind of the lightness of touch that was needed there. And even if it was some concession about wearing glasses bought by Lord Ali or something ultimately trivial like that, we needed a little bit of that, not this bulldozing. And that's where he fails.
What do you think, Caroline?
I think coming out of this grilling session this afternoon, 90 minutes of it, and not have something which would be a headline, oh, he's advanced a new policy or he's done this. His team, and I'm sure him, will think, that's a win, actually. They weren't the toughest of questions, I think, this afternoon. I think there were a few exceptions to that. I think Florence Eshalomi actually held him to account on the number of people who can't afford to pay their rents and the allowance that goes for people in benefits not being uprated and that leading to more pressures and homeless. That was the first question he got where he actually squirmed a bit on that. But look, it's his first outing. Again, let's see what happens next time. We might get a little bit of that self-deprecating humour that Tony Blair was so good at and even Cameron was good at in his heyday. But I think for him, coming out of this with no big headline, apart from what we've just seen, is probably good.
Did you prep Boris for them then, Boris Johnson?
Yes, and of course, the day he was toppled, he actually had to do Prime Minister's Question Time, and then he did, I think, 2 or 3 hours at the liaison committee, and all the while, it was all falling apart. And so when he does eventually emerge from that, most normal people would have been destroyed by 2 or 3 hours of the liaison committee. You know, they'd have come out incapable of thinking straight. And Boris came out and it was the night he was toppled. I think for Keir Starmer, he needs to think, why are we looking at perhaps having a Christmas #1 that is a song that is mocking, criticising what he has done on winter fuel payments? And just think, there are a lot of people hurting out there. They don't want some smart ass who can just get through that. They want a little sign of humility, a little recognition that even if he thinks he's doing the right stuff, and that's debated, but even if he thinks he's right, he recognises the pain, he recognises the disappointment. And Tony, as you say, would have done that.
Yeah, I mean, I think meanwhile, the latest polling on Kemi Badenoch is pretty dire. I mean, compared to where Keir Starmer was when he first became leader, she is way behind in terms of a majority of the public not thinking she could see her as a Prime Minister and not really seeing her as an effective leader of the Conservative Party. So to some extent, you know, again, if you had an opposition leader who was really, you know, providing a really strong counter to Keir Starmer, then he might be more worried about some of this. But I think, you know, there is something about what you say about leaning into some of the issues that have been more sensitive over the last 5 months, because undoubtedly that's a big issue. We had the WASPy women yesterday as well. But let's see. As I say, it was his first outing. There was no major gaffes. There was no sort of hostage to fortune going ahead. And let's see how he relaxes into it for his next encounter, which will be, who knows, very soon. It might come around quicker than he might think.
Exactly. Thanks both very much indeed. Still to come on the Politics Hub. Parliament breaks up, but is politics really frozen over the Christmas break? Plus, we will give you a sneak peek of the TV highlight of the season. It is, of course, the Politics Hub Christmas quiz.
Once almost lost, these denizens of the deep are back. The problem for these whales is global warming. Water temperatures are rising.
We're worried that the animals are actually starting to starve.
Deadly and outdated. What do you think should happen to the net?
I would like to see them go.
I'm Nicole Johnston, Sky's Asia correspondent, based here in Beijing. A towering monument to the China dream and its demise. From one end of this country to the other, China is littered with real estate that's falling apart. China is facing a tsunami of the elderly.
We have to work as long as health allows, otherwise, no money.
China is under pressure to pay for the pensions of 500 million retirees. I've reported on a wide range of stories from around the world.
Mass protests forced the president to flee.
The sight of the president's private swimming pool only reinforces to Sri Lankans the great divide here between rich and poor.
Aid groups say Gaza is now the world's most dangerous place to be a child.
The Israeli army has raided towns and villages all over the West Bank. These tunnels run all over Gaza. The Gaza Strip is ridden with them.
The referendum designed to unite the country has only deepened its divide.
Sydney's floodplains underwater again. This is the third or fourth time in the 18 months that their homes have gone under. Sky News, the full story first. It may seem like a gimmicky toy, but it is part of the global race between the United States and China for new technology. This elite engineering, designed to humour and to help us.
Weeknights on Sky News.
This is your chance. Tell people. Welcome to the Politics Hub.
Our police force has apologised. If you want to find out about Grimsby, you come to the docks. I'm live in Jerusalem.
Are you not concerned that that could lead to all-out war?
Hello there, good evening. There are fears of an upsurge in violence. What's at stake here?
You are watching the press preview, a first look at the front pages as they arrive.
Hello, welcome back to the Politics Hub. Well, we're going to be off air over Christmas, but don't worry, you can still get a festive fix of the Politics Hub with our Christmas quiz. Here's a sneak preview. And we're going to crack straight on with the questions because the year began with the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, appearing to rule out a spring general election. Now, speculation about the timing of the vote was at fever pitch and, let's be fair, pretty much remained so until the date was actually announced. It was a stormy month. Not one, not two, but three named storms battered the UK. Hank, Isha and Jocelyn, in case you're wondering. But, of course, we're focusing on the political weather battering number 10 that month. So, what I want to know is, when he was pressed on the timing of the election, the Prime Minister said his what was a general election in the second half of the year. Was it A, his strategy to win, B, his working assumption, or C, his 3 a.m. cold, sweaty, weepy nightmare? Right, A, B or C? It's going to be great, it's going to be great. Caroline's on it.
It's amazing, it's fantastic. I am sworn to secrecy as to the outcome, but it was highly competitive.
We actually did ask Guto as well, it should be said.
Yeah, and I wasn't
Busy.
free. It was so frustrating.
Outrageous. But no, a lot of fun. Thank you so much for watching Politics Hub this year. I hope you catch the quiz. And, of course, I'll see you next year. Can't believe it. But it's been a real pleasure. Up next is the UK Tonight.